The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dr. Richardson's office, casting a warm glow across her desk filled with medical prototypes and research papers. She paused for a moment, letting her fingers run across the smooth surface of her latest invention. A tiny device that would change how surgeons operated on the heart. It was moments like these when she couldn't help but smile, remembering her journey from a curious child who took apart her toys to understand how they worked, to becoming one of the most respected innovators in medical technology. Her phone buzzed with another congratulatory message. The FDA had just approved her company's newest surgical tool, and the medical community was buzzing with excitement. But Dr. Richardson's mind was already racing ahead to her next project, bringing these life-saving devices to underserved communities around the world. Walking through the research and development floor of her company, she watched her team at work. Some were hunched over microscopes, others were coding complex algorithms, but all of them shared the same passion that had driven her for the past 15 years. She stopped to chat with a young intern who reminded her of herself at that age, full of ideas and unafraid to challenge the status quo. Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones, she told the intern, who was struggling with a design problem. It was the same advice her grandmother had given her years ago, while teaching her to bake bread in their small kitchen. Those words had guided her through medical school, through countless failed prototypes, and through the challenges of building a company from scratch. The afternoon brought a meeting with her board of directors. As she presented the quarterly results, she couldn't help but feel proud of how far they'd come. From a tiny startup in a cramped office to a company that was revolutionizing surgical procedures worldwide. The numbers told a story of success, but what really mattered to her were the letters from patients and doctors, sharing stories of faster recoveries and lives saved. Later that day, she sat in the pilot's seat of her newly acquired jet, running her hands over the controls. This wasn't just a luxury. It was a tool that would help her reach hospitals and medical centers across the country, training doctors and bringing new technology to places that needed it most. The jet represented everything she'd worked for, the ability to make a difference on a larger scale. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the airport runway, she thought about her mother's words from years ago. Dream big, but keep your feet on the ground. She had done exactly that, building success brick by brick, never forgetting why she started this journey in the first place. Tomorrow, she would fly to a small rural hospital to demonstrate her company's new surgical equipment. The excitement of seeing the impact of her work firsthand never got old. Looking out across the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance, Dr. Richardson felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had proven that with determination, intelligence, and compassion, any barrier could be overcome. Her success wasn't just her own. It was a beacon of hope for every young person who dared to dream big, regardless of their background. The night security guard waved as she finally headed home. "Another late night, Doc?" he called out with a friendly smile. She waved back, thinking about how every person in her company, from the cleaning staff to the top researchers, was part of this incredible journey. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she was grateful for how far they'd come, and excited about where they were headed next. It started like any other Tuesday morning. Dr. Richardson sat at her desk, sipping her usual green tea, reviewing the quarterly financial reports. Something caught her eye. A small discrepancy in the aviation maintenance expenses. Most people would have missed it, but she had always believed in knowing every detail of her business, down to the smallest number. She pulled up more documents, digging deeper into the records. Her heart began to race as she uncovered layer after layer of carefully hidden transactions. The numbers didn't add up, and her stomach tightened with each new discovery. Her private jet, the one she'd bought with her personal savings, had somehow been registered under a different ownership structure. Her CFO walked in, wearing his usual confident smile. She'd known him for 8 years, trusted him with her company's finances, even invited him to her family gatherings. "Can you explain these numbers?" she asked quietly, turning her computer screen toward him. The smile faltered for just a second, long enough for her to know. The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency meetings and phone calls. Her legal team gathered in the conference room, faces grave as they examined document after document. The betrayal ran deep: falsified paperwork, forged signatures, and a complex web of deception that had been building for months. "I should have seen it coming," she whispered to herself, standing by the window of her office. The same window where she'd stood countless times, planning her company's future. Now she watched as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, matching her mood. Her assistant brought in another stack of papers, evidence of how her jet had been sold to another buyer without her knowledge. That evening, she drove home in silence, her mind replaying every interaction with her CFO over the past year. The subtle changes in behavior, the delayed reports, the excessive business trips, all the signs she dismissed because she believed in trusting her team. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from board members and investors, but she needed time to think. At home, she pulled out an old photo album. Inside was a picture of the day she'd bought the jet. She remembered the pride in her parents' eyes, how her father had touched the aircraft's wing with tears in his eyes, saying, "Look how far you've come." Now she had to call them and explain how it had all gone wrong. But as she sat in her kitchen, watching the night settle over the city, something shifted inside her. The same determination that had driven her to build her company from nothing began to stir. She reached for her phone and called her most trusted friend, a retired auditor who had always given her straight talk. "We're going to fight this," her friend said firmly after hearing the whole story. "You've got the receipts, the original documentation, everything." They thought you wouldn't notice, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Dr. Richardson stayed up late into the night, making notes, organizing files, planning her next steps. Her dining room table became a command center, covered with papers and sticky notes. This wasn't just about a jet anymore. It was about standing up to those who thought they could take advantage of others' trust. As she finally headed to bed, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She saw worry in her eyes, yes, but also strength. She remembered what her grandmother used to say: "Sometimes people will try to dim your light because it shines too bright. That's when you need to shine even brighter." Tomorrow would bring challenges, but she was ready. She had built her success on integrity and innovation, and she wouldn't let anyone steal that from her. The betrayal hurt, deep in her chest where trust used to live, but it had also awakened a fighter's spirit. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in her story, and she was determined to make it count. The headlines hit like a hammer. Dr. Richardson's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications as news outlets picked up the story. Medical tech CEO loses control, company in crisis, questions raised about leadership. Each one felt like a personal attack. She turned off her phone, but the words had already burned themselves into her mind. Walking into the office that morning was the hardest thing she'd ever done. The usual warmth was gone, replaced by whispers that stopped when she passed by. Some employees couldn't meet her eyes, while others gave her looks of pity that felt worse than anger. Her morning coffee sat cold on her desk, untouched. The company she'd built with 15 years of sweat and determination was shaking at its foundation. Partners who'd eagerly taken her calls just weeks ago now had their assistants say they were in meetings. One major hospital chain put their contract under review. Each email brought more bad news, like waves hitting a shore during a storm. That afternoon, she had to face a board meeting. The same room where she presented countless successes now felt like a courtroom. Board members who used to smile and nod now sat with stern faces, looking through papers and whispering to each other. When she stood to speak, her voice shook at first, but she forced herself to stay strong. "I know what you've all read," she said, looking each person in the eye. "But I built this company on truth and innovation. I won't let one person's actions destroy that." Some nodded slightly, others just wrote notes. The uncertainty hung in the air like thick fog. The stress began showing in small ways. She noticed more gray hairs in the mirror each morning. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by long nights reviewing documents and preparing for legal meetings. Her usual morning jog, once her time to clear her head and plan the day, became a struggle just to put one foot in front of the other. Her parents called every day, worried about her. "You're not eating enough," her mother would say, hearing the tiredness in her voice. Her father, always the optimist, kept reminding her of the time she fell off her bike as a kid, but got back up and won the race anyway. Their love helped, but she could hear the worry they tried to hide. The worst part was seeing young employees, especially women who had looked up to her, questioning their own dreams. She overheard one telling another in the break room, "If it could happen to her, what chance do we have?" That night, she cried in her car for the first time since this all began. But even in the darkest moments, small acts of loyalty shone through. Her assistant brought her favorite lunch without being asked. A young engineer left a note on her desk saying, "We believe in you." A longtime client called just to say they weren't going anywhere. These tiny sparks of hope kept her going. Her grandmother's old saying kept coming back to her. Sometimes you have to go through the storm to appreciate the rainbow. Well, she was certainly in the middle of the storm now. Her company's stock price dropped daily, reporters camped outside her office, and social media buzzed with speculation and judgment. One evening, as she sat alone in her office, looking at old photos of company celebrations and product launches, something clicked inside her. Yes, she had been knocked down. Yes, her reputation was under attack. But she hadn't come this far to give up now. Each criticism, each doubt, each setback, they were trying to write her story for her. It was time to pick up the pen and write it herself. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not another legal document or financial report, but her own account of what happened. Clear, honest, and strong. If people wanted to talk about her company, they would hear the truth from her first. The words flowed easily now, powered by the same determination that had built her company in the first place. The office was quiet and dark, except for the light from her computer screen. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more doubts, more battles. But tonight, she was finding her voice again, preparing to fight back. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been pushed down and told to stay there. The fall had been hard, but it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The conference room had become her war room. Papers covered every inch of the long table. Bank statements, flight records, ownership documents, all telling pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. Dr. Richardson stood at the window, watching the sunrise, her third cup of coffee growing cold beside her laptop. "We found something," her forensic accountant called out, waving a document. She'd hired the best team she could find, people who could follow money trails and uncover hidden transactions. They worked through the night, fueled by determination and endless cups of coffee. Every new discovery felt like a small victory in this uphill battle. Her phone lit up with a message from another business owner who had faced similar fraud. "Tell your story," the message read. "People need to hear it." She hesitated, thinking about the risks of going public. But staying quiet hadn't helped. That afternoon, she sat down in front of her laptop's camera and started recording. "I want to talk to you about trust, betrayal, and fighting back," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She shared her story simply and honestly, not hiding the pain or the anger, but focusing on the determination to make things right. She posted the video before she could second-guess herself. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from other business owners who had faced similar situations. Messages arrived from people she'd never met, sharing their own stories of fighting against injustice. What had felt like a lonely battle suddenly became something bigger. Her legal team grew stronger as more experts volunteered to help. They gathered in her office, spreading documents across the floor when they ran out of table space. Look at this pattern, one would say, connecting dots that had been hidden before. Each discovery was like finding another piece of armor for the battle ahead. Late one evening, she found herself looking at old text messages between her and her former CFO. Signs she had missed, red flags she had ignored. But instead of feeling shame, she felt stronger. She was learning, and she would make sure others learned from her experience too. The media started picking up her story, but this time it was different. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a fighter. She spoke at business gatherings, sharing what she had learned about protecting yourself and your company. Young entrepreneurs took notes, asked questions, shared their own concerns. Her social media became a platform for change. She posted updates about her legal battle, shared resources for other business owners, and highlighted similar cases that needed attention. If we stay silent, nothing changes, she wrote. The post was shared thousands of times within hours. Some days were harder than others. The legal battles drained her energy and resources. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the messages she received daily from people drawing strength from her fight. "You helped me find my voice," one woman wrote. "I'm fighting my own battle now." Her team discovered a pattern of similar frauds targeting other successful business owners. They built a wall of evidence, connecting cases that had seemed unrelated before. Each connection made their case stronger, turning personal pain into powerful testimony. The stress still showed. In the late nights, the missed family dinners, the weight of responsibility. But there was a different energy now. Her mother noticed it during their weekly calls. "You sound stronger," she said, "like you did when you first started your company." One morning, as she prepared for another day of meetings and legal discussions, she caught herself smiling at her reflection. The woman looking back wasn't broken or defeated. She was transformed, stronger, ready to fight not just for herself, but for every person who had ever faced injustice and felt powerless. Her phone buzzed with another message from someone seeking advice. Before, such messages would have felt like a burden. Now they felt like fuel for the fire that drove her forward. She wasn't just fighting to reclaim her jet anymore. She was fighting to change the system that had made such theft possible in the first place. "Ready for today?" her assistant asked, bringing in the morning's schedule. "More than ready," she replied, gathering her files. The path ahead was still long and challenging, but she wasn't walking it alone anymore. Every step forward wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who would come after, everyone who needed to know that fighting back was possible, that justice was worth pursuing, that one voice could inspire many. The email arrived on a quiet Sunday morning. "We need to talk," it read. "Your story is our story too." The sender was a successful restaurant chain owner who had faced similar fraud. Within hours, more messages flooded in from business owners across the country. Each had their own tale of betrayal, but they all shared the same pain and the same determination to fight back. Dr. Richardson sat in her home office, reading message after message. A tech company founder who lost her patents. A construction company owner whose equipment was stolen through fraudulent papers. A shipping business owner who nearly lost everything to a similar scheme. Their words echoed her own experience, creating a chorus of voices too loud to ignore. She organized a video call, expecting a few people to join. Instead, 40 faces filled her screen, each with their own story to tell. They talked for hours, sharing experiences, strategies, and hope. "We're stronger together," someone said, and heads nodded across the digital space. That evening, the Business Protection Alliance was born. The alliance grew faster than anyone expected. They met weekly, sharing resources and supporting each other. A retired judge offered legal guidance. A cybersecurity expert taught them about protecting digital assets. Each member brought something unique to the table, turning individual struggles into collective wisdom. Word spread through business communities. Local news stations started covering their meetings. Dr. Richardson's phone rang constantly with calls from reporters wanting to know more. "This isn't just about fraud," she told them. "It's about standing up for what's right, about protecting dreams that people spent years building." The Alliance created a secure online platform where members could share documents, patterns, and warnings. They spotted similarities in how the frauds were carried out, uncovering a network of white-collar criminals who had been operating for years. Their evidence pile grew, catching the attention of federal investigators. One morning, Dr. Richardson stood before a congressional committee. The room was packed, cameras flashing as she shared her story. But this time, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She carried the voices of hundreds of other business owners who had joined their cause. The politicians leaned forward, taking notes, asking questions. Finally, someone was listening. Back at her office, she watched the Alliance's membership grow. People didn't just join to get help, they joined to offer it. A business owner who had won his case helped 3 others prepare their legal documents. Someone who had learned to spot fraudulent paperwork created a training program. Every success story strengthened their community. The Alliance set up a hotline for business owners who spotted suspicious activity. Calls came in daily, and each one was taken seriously. "I wish we'd had this when it happened to me," Dr. Richardson told her team as they trained new volunteers. "But we're here now, and we're making a difference." Late one evening, as she reviewed new membership applications, she found a message that brought tears to her eyes. "You saved my business," it read. "Because of the warning signs your Alliance shared, I caught the fraud attempt early. Thank you for turning your pain into protection for others." The Alliance organized its first in-person conference. Business owners flew in from across the country. There were workshops on fraud prevention, legal rights, and business protection. But more importantly, there were connections made, friendships formed, and a sense of community strengthened. In the conference hall, Dr. Richardson watched people sharing stories, exchanging contact information, offering support. Some were just starting their fight for justice, while others had already won their battles. But they all shared the same spirit, the understanding that together, they could make real change happen. A young business owner approached her during a break. "I was ready to give up," she said softly. "Then I found the Alliance. Now I know I'm not alone." Dr. Richardson hugged her, remembering her own darkest days, grateful that no one else would have to face such challenges alone again. As the conference ended, plans were already being made for the next one. The Alliance had become more than just a support group. It was a movement, a force for change in the business world. Each member carried the same message: stand together, fight back, make a difference. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. Members of the Business Protection Alliance stood shoulder to shoulder, a sea of supporters wearing blue ribbons, their symbol of justice. Dr. Richardson gripped her folder of documents, 18 months of fighting contained in those pages. Her parents stood beside her, just as they had on her first day of medical school, her company launch, every important moment of her life. Inside the courtroom, she sat tall, her heart racing, but her face calm. The evidence they'd gathered played out like a well-rehearsed symphony. Bank records showed the careful trail of deception. Flight logs proved her ownership. Witnesses stepped forward, each adding another piece to the puzzle she'd spent so long solving. Her former CFO sat across the room, looking smaller than she remembered. When the prosecution showed the forged documents, she didn't feel anger anymore, just relief that the truth was finally coming to light. The judge listened carefully, taking notes, asking pointed questions that showed he understood the significance of this case. During a break, she stepped into the hallway where dozens of business owners waited. They weren't just spectators. They were warriors in the same fight. Some had already won their cases, inspired by her battle. Others were just starting their legal journeys, drawing strength from each victory. The final day of the trial arrived with autumn sunshine streaming through the high windows. When the judge began to speak, the courtroom fell silent. "This court finds," The words washed over her like warm rain. Victory. Full restitution. Her jet would be returned. But it was the judge's additional comments that meant the most. This case, he said, has exposed a serious flaw in our system, one that allowed criminals to prey on hardworking business owners. Thanks to the evidence presented here, we can now close these loopholes. He went on to recommend new verification procedures for aircraft ownership transfers. Her personal fight had led to change that would protect countless others. Outside, reporters clustered with microphones and cameras. She didn't feel tired anymore, despite the long months of battle. "This isn't just my victory," she told them, her voice steady and strong. "This is a victory for every person who's ever been told to give up, to stay quiet, to accept injustice. Today proves that fighting back works." That evening, she stood in the hangar, looking at her jet. It seemed different now, not just a symbol of success, but of perseverance. The maintenance crew had kept it in perfect condition, waiting for this day. She ran her hand along the smooth metal, remembering all the dreams she'd had for it, dreams that could now become reality again. Her phone kept buzzing with congratulations. Business schools were calling, wanting her to speak to their students about corporate ethics and fighting fraud. Law firms reached out, eager to learn from her case. But the messages that touched her most came from ordinary people who saw hope in her victory. Back at her office, she found her team had organized a small celebration. Someone had framed the court decision. Another person had made a timeline of their journey, from the first discovery of fraud to the final victory. Looking at it all laid out, she was amazed at how far they'd come. Her assistant handed her a stack of letters. More business owners seeking help, inspired by her win. She didn't feel overwhelmed by the requests now. Instead, she felt energized. Each letter represented another person standing up, refusing to be a victim, ready to fight for what was right. Later that night, she sat in her living room, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what they'd achieved. Her grandmother's words came back to her. Sometimes you have to go through the storm to appreciate the rainbow. The storm had been fierce, but the rainbow was more beautiful than she could have imagined. Her laptop showed dozens of news articles about the case. Landmark decision in business fraud case. One headline read. Another called it a victory for corporate justice. But her favorite was from a small business journal. One woman's fight changes the system. Because that's what it had really been about, not just getting her jet back, but changing things for the better. Tomorrow, she would start working on new protective measures for business owners. The Alliance had more cases to fight, more people to help. But tonight, she let herself enjoy this moment of triumph, knowing that sometimes the hardest battles bring the most meaningful victories. 1 year after her court victory, Dr. Richardson stood in front of a classroom full of bright-eyed business students. The projector showed pictures of her journey, the early days of her company, the fraud discovery, the court battle, and finally, the victory. But it was what came next that made her eyes light up as she spoke. "Your biggest setback can become your greatest purpose," she told them. The Business Protection Foundation, born from her struggle, had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. Their offices now occupied an entire floor of her company's building, staffed by lawyers, accountants, and business experts, all dedicated to helping others fight fraud. The jet that had once been at the center of her legal battle now served a new purpose. Every month, she flew young entrepreneurs from underserved communities to attend intensive business workshops. Today's group was arriving, 20 aspiring business owners who had dreams as big as hers had been. As they climbed aboard, she saw their wide eyes taking in the aircraft's interior. For many, it was their first time on a private jet. "This plane was almost stolen from me," she told them as they settled in. "Now it's helping make sure no one can steal your dreams." Their faces showed the same determination she'd once seen in her own mirror. Back at the Foundation's offices, phones rang constantly with calls from business owners seeking help. The staff knew exactly what to do. They'd been trained to spot warning signs, guide people through legal processes, and most importantly, offer hope. On the walls hung success stories, photographs of people who'd fought back and won, inspired by her example. The foundation's legal team had grown too. They took on cases pro bono, helping those who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. Dr. Richardson made sure they had all the resources they needed. "We're not just weighing cases," the head lawyer told her one day. "We're changing how the system works." She kept her promise to her parents about using success to help others. The foundation offered scholarships to students interested in business law and fraud prevention. "Maybe one of these kids will solve problems we haven't even thought of yet," she told her mother during their weekly dinner. The Business Protection Alliance, now with chapters in every state, held monthly meetings where members shared stories and strategies. Dr. Richardson attended when she could, but she was proudest when new leaders emerged, sharing their own experiences and wisdom. The movement had grown beyond her, exactly as she'd hoped. Her old office wall now displayed a different kind of timeline, not of her fight, but of the foundation's impact. Numbers told the story. Thousands of business owners helped, millions in assets protected, hundreds of fraud attempts stopped before they could cause damage. But it was the letters that meant the most to her. "You gave me courage to start again," one read. Another said, "Because of your foundation, I kept my family business." Each letter reminded her why the hard days had been worth it. She created a folder on her computer called Reasons, filled with these messages. On tough days, reading them renewed her energy. The Young Entrepreneurs Program became her favorite project. Watching them grow from nervous beginners to confident business owners brought her joy she hadn't expected. They called her their mentor, but she learned from them too, their fresh perspectives, their innovative ideas, their fearless approach to challenges. One evening, as she prepared for another foundation board meeting, she caught sight of a photo on her desk. It showed her standing on the courthouse steps after her victory, surrounded by supporters. Next to it sat a more recent picture, her with a group of young business owners she mentored, all of them beaming with pride at their graduation ceremony. The foundation had just launched a new initiative, a digital platform where business owners could instantly check for fraud red flags and get help if needed. "We're not just fighting fires anymore," she told her team. "We're preventing them from starting." The platform was already saving businesses before they even knew they were at risk. As the sun set over the city, she stood at her office window, just like she had so many times before. But now, instead of seeing her own reflection, she saw the lights of other office buildings where dreams were growing, protected by the systems and support she'd helped create. Her grandmother's words about rainbows after storms had been right, but now she was helping others find their rainbows too.